Where is that? Ah, you want to just spend the rest?
My God, my saviour. I've never stand up for all that.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the 60-minute briefing with Scotland's First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon. Welcome back.
Thank you.
We're very glad to have you here at this quite eventful time. I would say even sad time. I think we have to keep recalling that the United Kingdom has left the European Union. In many ways, it doesn't feel like it yet, given that we're still in the transition period. But as of the beginning of this month, the UK is a third country. And of course, that has many implications. We are now entering into the second phase of the negotiations. There are a number of difficult issues coming up, including the future relationship, including tricky questions like fisheries, like level playing field conditions, and maybe quite a concern that in the second phase we might not come to a satisfactory conclusion for both sides, that we are still facing a situation where by the end of this year, unless transition is extended, we might be in a position of no deal again. So it is a difficult time, and of course all of that has also implications for Scotland. So we're very glad you're here to give us your thoughts on how the UK-EU relationship might evolve, and how that will affect Scotland in particular, and what your vision is for the Scottish-EU relationship. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed, Fabian, and thank you to all of you for coming along here today. It's always a pleasure for me to be here in Brussels once the microphone is switched on. There we go. It's always a real pleasure to be here in Brussels, but as Fabian has alluded to, at this time it feels a little bit different. This is the first time I've been here. In fact, it's the first time I've been anywhere outside of Scotland since the UK left the European Union 10 days ago. And Brexit was certainly and is certainly a very sad matter for me and for many people in Scotland. And indeed, I think it's a sad occasion and event for many people across the UK. In fact, some of the most affecting moments of the week leading up to Brexit actually occurred here in Brussels. I was especially struck when I saw footage from the Wednesday of that week at the last session of the European Parliament to be attended by MEPs from the UK. The sincerity, the grace and the goodwill in speeches from people such as Guy Verhofstadt and Ursula von der Leyen was in itself impressive. But for many people, and perhaps in particular for many people in Scotland, the most moving moment of all was at the very end when MEPs from all parties and all countries stood together to sing Auld Lang Syne. And that scene, which was one of solidarity and friendship, encapsulated many of the values that the Scottish Government and many people in Scotland most cherish about the European Union. And for me, and I suspect for a lot of people in Scotland, hearing the words of Robert Burns in that room at that time had another effect. It reinforced the sense that Scotland has left a place where we feel we belong, that we should still be participating in that chamber rather than departing it. And on the same day that those scenes were taking place in the European Parliament, in fact almost exactly at the same time, the Scottish Parliament was doing something equally significant. It was voting to back a further referendum on Scottish independence. And I suppose the connections between these two scenes form the basis of the remarks I want to make to you today. I'm going to set out briefly the ongoing regret the Scottish Government feels over Brexit. I will then explain some of the ways in which the Scottish Government will seek to respond to Brexit. And of course, in doing that, I will make clear our desire to return to the European Parliament as an independent nation, comfortable as EU members, of course, have to be with the idea that independence in the modern world involves recognising and embracing our interdependence. As, of course, is now very well known, the majority of people in Scotland chose to stay in the EU when the question was asked in the referendum in 2016. Subsequent opinion polls suggest that pro-EU sentiment has grown since then, and our desire to stay has also been reaffirmed by 3 subsequent nationwide elections. In the UK general election in December, for example, parties in favour of remaining in the EU or in favour of holding a further EU referendum gained almost 3/4 of the vote. So the pro-European sentiment has very deep and very strong roots in Scotland. And of course, the basic principle behind the EU of independent nations working together for the common good is one which appeals to many people in Scotland. We also recognise and have seen this demonstrated very clearly in the last couple of years, the solidarity that the EU offers to smaller member states. People in Scotland have seen and I suspect will long remember the support that the EU gave to Ireland throughout the first stage of the Brexit process. In addition, we have day-to-day experience of the practical benefits of membership. EU regulations have made our rivers and coasts cleaner. Our universities collaborate with research partners across the continent. EU freedom of movement has given opportunities to people living in Scotland and of course has encouraged new Scots to contribute to our economy and our society. And of course one of our priorities at present is to support these EU citizens to stay in Scotland and to feel welcome in Scotland, to feel, as we do, that it is their home. Of course, our businesses also benefit from the single market. In fact, figures just last week demonstrated that over the past 5 years, Scotland's sales to the EU, which account for more than half of our international exports, have grown by more than 4% a year. That's more than twice as fast as our exports to the rest of the world. So we are leaving the European Union, imperfect though it undoubtedly is, at a time when we have never benefited from it more. And we're also leaving it, in my view, at a time when we have never needed it more. In an age when intolerance and bigotry seem to be on the rise, I think it's important that we hold true to the values of the EU, values of democracy, equality, solidarity, the rule of law, respect for human rights. These values are more important than they have ever been before. The founding motivation of the EU as a peace project is one which is perhaps too easily forgotten, certainly in the UK, but its importance has certainly struck me regularly in recent years at memorial events for the two world wars, and most recently, just a matter of days ago, for the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. And at a time of climate crisis, cooperating with the EU improves our collective ability to tackle climate change at home and also amplifies our voice in international negotiations. And in an age of great trading blocs, the EU represents, in my view, our best opportunity in a very difficult climate for this, for benefiting from free trade without engaging in a race to the bottom. All of this, I think, is important. It helps to explain why Scotland regrets Brexit and why so many of us continue to feel European. But of course, the real question, and I'm sure the one you want me to focus on, isn't what we have lost since Brexit has now happened. It is what happens next. What practical steps can Scotland take to mitigate or reverse the consequences of the UK government's actions in bringing about Brexit? And there are essentially two parts to that answer. Firstly, for as long as Scotland remains part of the United Kingdom, the Scottish Government, will try to influence UK government policy and, where possible, to work constructively with the UK government. And that point, of course, extends far beyond the Brexit negotiations. As many of you will know, the COP26 climate summit will take place in Glasgow in November. That's due to be the most important climate summit since the Paris talks in 2015. In fact, given the ever-increasing urgency of the climate crisis, I think there's an argument for saying that it is more important than the Paris talks. There has been a lot of talk back in the UK recently about the Glasgow summit and about relations between the Scottish and UK governments in regard to that. So it's maybe worth being very clear about my approach here. There is a strong argument, I think a very strong argument, for saying that nothing that happens anywhere in the world this year will be more important than making that Glasgow summit a success. The Scottish Government therefore will work as hard as we can to make it a success. That includes working positively and constructively with the UK Government. And a similar principle applies to the UK's negotiations with the EU. We will do what we can to work as closely and constructively as possible. In doing so, despite our pessimism about the direction of travel of the UK government in terms of its future relationship with the EU, we will work to try to influence negotiations in a way which benefits Scotland, which benefit the UK and the EU. In particular, we will continue to stress the value of having a close trading relationship with the EU, as close a relationship as possible. The Prime Minister, of course, made a speech about this last week. He insisted in that speech on having the right to diverge from EU standards in areas like social and environmental standards. On the other hand, the EU basically wants a guarantee that the UK will not regress, that the UK will not undercut the EU by adopting lower standards. This, of course, is an issue that matters hugely. As the EU continually makes clear, the more we diverge from EU standards, the less access we'll have to the single market. So the right to diverge will come at a cost, a very heavy cost, in fact, in my view, a cost that is too heavy. In the areas where non-regression applies, the UK has and will always have the ability to opt for higher standards than those required by the EU. Although the Prime Minister never explicitly said this, in fact, he never gave a single concrete example of an area in which divergence could benefit the UK. The only possible reason for wanting the freedom to diverge is if you want to adopt lower standards than the EU does. So as things stand, there is a danger, or there is certainly reason for a real concern, that the UK will in future significantly reduce our access to the single market, something which will harm manufacturers and service industries across the country, because it wants the freedom to lower standards relating to health, safety, the environment and workers' rights. The Scottish Government will argue very strongly against that approach. We largely support the idea of a level playing field, which removes the possibility of the UK adopting lower standards than the EU. That helps to protect our environmental standards and working conditions, and it also makes it easier for Scottish businesses to export to the EU. We will continually make the case for that as these negotiations proceed. That said, on past evidence, I have to confess that I'm not overly optimistic about our chances of being successful. So we're also looking in Scotland to what we can do within our devolved powers to maintain the closest possible ties with Europe. We, for example, intend to introduce legislation which enables Scotland to keep pace with EU regulatory standards where we have the power to do so. It is a way in which we can protect the health and well-being of people in Scotland, maintain the international reputation of businesses in Scotland, and make it easier when the time comes, as I believe it will, for Scotland to return to the European Union. And we will also, and this is the second part of our approach, work towards the most obvious and important steps Scotland can take in response to Brexit. We will seek to become an independent country and then seek to re-establish our EU membership. And the case for us being able to choose independence is clear. 6 years ago, as all of you know, Scotland had a vote on whether to become an independent country. Opponents of independence said repeatedly that voting to remain in the UK was the only way for us to stay in the European Union. I think it's fair to say it hasn't quite worked out that way. But there is a serious point, because that argument weighed heavily with many voters back in 2014. Since then, of course, we've been taken out of the EU against our will. Our efforts at compromise of keeping the UK inside the single market and the customs union have been rejected, and the overall approach taken to Brexit has consistently been contrary to Scotland's views, to our values and to our interests. And strong support for the EU is, I think, one of the main reasons that the party I lead, the SNP, did so well in the recent UK general election, in which we won 80% of all of the seats in Scotland and recorded a higher vote share in Scotland than Boris Johnson did across the UK. We put front and centre in that election the right of the people of Scotland to choose their own future, to choose between staying in the UK after Brexit or becoming an independent country. Since that election, opinion polls in Scotland have shown majority support for independence, and there are very large majorities for the principle that it should be for the Scottish Parliament, not Westminster governments, to determine whether and when there should be an independence vote. I'm a believer in democracy, in the rule of law, in the power of respectful persuasion and deliberation, even although my faith in that may have been tested somewhat over the past 3 years. But it is why I continue to believe that as we press the case for Scotland's right to choose, we should agree a process between ourselves and the UK government for a referendum in line with the clear mandate given by the people of Scotland. Now, none of this, I think, should be a matter of great controversy with the UK government. The UK is not a unitary state, it's a voluntary union of nations. And one of those nations, Scotland, has expressed majority support time and again for remaining in the EU. I don't believe it is right that more than 5 million EU citizens should be removed from the European Union after 47 years of membership without even the chance to have their say on the future of their country. That's why we are taking in Scotland and the Scottish Government the steps required to ensure that a referendum can be held that is legal and legitimate, so that the result can be accepted and embraced both at home and internationally. We're asking the Electoral Commission, the independent body that oversees elections and referendums in the UK, to test again the question that would be asked in that referendum, and inviting Scotland's elected representatives to gather in a new constitutional convention to broaden and embed that support for self-determination for Scotland's right to choose. In the weeks ahead, we'll also continue to update the independence proposition to give people the information they need to make an informed choice about Scotland's future. The series of papers that we'll publish to do that will include our plans for EU membership. I know, and indeed some of the comments made by Donald Tusk last week confirmed this, that there is goodwill towards Scotland in Europe. We want to build on that goodwill. We are keen to outline a clear route to re-accession, to show that we understand what EU membership requires, and to demonstrate that we have much to offer, as I believe we do. Some of that, of course, should be relatively straightforward. We already comply with the EU acquis, and as I've said, we're passing legislation to ensure that that continues to be the case where practically possible. We also welcome free movement because we support it in principle, but know how much Scotland has to benefit from that. And I hope that our overall approach as a constructive friend and partner to the EU is not in doubt. Of course, Brexit has changed the context of the choice that will be offered to the people of Scotland compared with 2014. But fundamentally, there is a choice, and there should be a choice. Do we in Scotland believe that it is better for our future or not to be part of the world's largest trading bloc and the shared values and benefits of EU membership? Ultimately, when, and I do believe that it is a when, Scotland gains independence, I believe that the case for us joining the EU will be an overwhelming one. And that view, I know, is shared by many distinguished experts, although many of them will not take a view on whether or not Scotland should be independent. But I was struck by a paper that Fabian wrote about Scotland and the EU last summer, which put, I think, the basic issue really well. It said that for Europe, rejecting a country that wants to be in the EU, accepts all conditions, is willing to go through the appropriate processes and follows European principles should be inconceivable. Apart from anything else, we will rejoin not simply as a country with much to gain, but as one which has much to contribute. That is made clear by the strategy document we published a couple of weeks ago, setting out Scotland's perspective on the key policy priorities for the EU set out by Ursula von der Leyen, the new president. Her support for an economy that works for everyone finds direct echoes in Scotland, a country that is increasingly focusing on well-being alongside wealth as a measurement of success. Her emphasis on Europe fit for the digital age is also one we strongly support. Scotland is already becoming one of the most important tech centres anywhere in Europe. Her desire for a Green New Deal is one we also share. Scotland has some of the strongest statutory climate change targets in the world. We want to help lead the world into the net zero age, and we know that our efforts would be enhanced by membership of the EU. The Commission's other priorities also speak to our shared values. In all of these areas, Scotland is a country which can and will make a difference. We can lead by example where that's possible, but also learn from the example of others. But we know that we will do this more effectively by working in partnership. We believe, and I believe very strongly, that our sovereignty will be amplified, not diminished, by membership of the EU. I began a few moments ago by reflecting on the last appearance for now of Scottish MEPs in the European Parliament. And when the old Scottish Parliament had its last sitting some time ago, back in 1707, proceedings were closed then by the Speaker, Lord Seafield, and he said that it was the end of an old sang. These remarks, I thought, found a curious echo in the scenes at the European Parliament 2 weeks ago. The singing of an old Auld Lang Syne marked the end of something which, although maybe not that old, has been very important to many people in Scotland. But our task now is to try and turn that end into a beginning, to find our voice as an independent nation and take our place on the European and the world stage. And when we do that, we'll have the opportunity to speak up together with friends across Europe and around the world for democracy, equality and human rights. We have the ability to contribute hugely to tackling the challenges such as the climate crisis that the world faces, and we'll be able to work in partnership to enhance the well-being of people in Scotland, Europe and around the world. So for all of these reasons, and no doubt many more, I look forward to the day when Scotland returns where I think we belong, to EU membership with a place in our own right in the Council and the European Parliament. As an independent nation, we will embrace international cooperation, and then we can sing of solidarity and friendship, not out of sorrow, but with optimism and hope for the future. So thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to share these thoughts with you today, and I look forward now to your questions and our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, First Minister. I'll start with a question and then I'll open it up to the audience. You were talking at the end about what it would be like if Scotland comes back into the European Union. I want to ask you what kind of member state, what kind of EU member would Scotland be? And what I'm thinking here is obviously it is not the UK membership. The UK membership has come with a lot of special provisions, opt-outs, the rebate. The UK is a very different country, a large country rather than a small country. So how would you see Scotland positioning itself within the EU?
Well, I think... Sorry, the microphone. Well, I believe Scotland would be a constructive and enthusiastic EU member state. We are a small country, but I believe small countries can have a big influence if they work smartly and cleverly. There are areas of current EU provision that we would, as a country, argue for change and reform, and that is in the nature of these things, the common fisheries policy being one example of that. But I wouldn't see Scotland as a semi-detached, reluctant member of the EU, but one instead that seeks to use our expertise and the shared priorities we have to play a positive part in creating the kind of Europe that we want to be part of. So I think Europe, like Scotland, has a lot to gain from that situation, and that's why I hope it's not too much further into the future before it happens.
Thank you. So I'll take 3 or 4 questions at the same time, and I'll start right at the back. I've seen 2 more, and I'll come back to the rest afterwards.
Thank you. James Quick from the Daily Telegraph. I have a back here. You mentioned the common fisheries policy, First Minister, and you said you'd argue for reform. But you can only really argue for reform of the common fisheries policy once you're a member. You can't argue for reform of it during an accession process. So how would you make the argument to Scottish fishermen that they would have to rejoin a policy which is widely believed to be skewed against them?
I'm Crazy Cameron. I actually helped set up the European movement in Scotland some 50 years ago, so I must say I agree with everything you said. But we've got to get from A to B, and there's 2 stages. I mean, one, assuming the SNP win a clear majority at the next parliamentary elections, is that sufficient, do you think, to persuade the British government to actually pass the legislation for a second referendum? And of course, the second part is now that Scotland's out, there's 2 questions that come back possibly to haunt you. One, the old one, was the currency issue that played a part in the 2014 referendum. But now you've got the border issue potentially between Scotland and England. So any thoughts on these issues would be interesting.
Thank you. Michael Peel, Financial Times. I also have a question about fish. The Scottish salmon producers were warning today of the extra burdens created by Brexit. Clearly there's a lot of concern. How concerned are you about the way that UK fisheries policy seems to be going after Brexit, and how much of a problem do you think that will be for Scottish producers?
Well, thank you for all these questions. Let me take James and Michael's first and together, since they are broadly speaking on the same issue. And actually, the answer lies, in a sense, in the different angles that those 2 questions came from on the same issue. In terms of my message to Scottish fishermen, my party is a long-standing critic of the common fisheries policy, but I think Scottish fishermen were made promises in the run-up to and since the Brexit referendum that we are about to see are very difficult for the UK government to deliver. Effectively, the promise that was made was that we could have control over Scottish waters at the same time as having no compromise of our ability to trade and sell our fish into European markets. And I think the reality of that is about to be seen. And we see from the salmon producers this morning the real concerns about the impact of having tariffs or greater bureaucracy in terms of selling the produce into the European market. So what we have to do is get a sensible position that, yes, I think it seeks to improve the position of Scotland within that framework in terms of control over our own waters, but recognises that, if landing more fish, if you cannot process the fish because you've got restrictions on European labour working in our fish processing plants, or if you then can't sell that fish into the markets that we currently sell them into, is not the ideal situation to have. Now, the promises that were made by the Tories, I think the Tories deserve to be held to account and have their feet held to the fire on the delivery of these promises. But my job is to have, I guess, more honest conversations with not just our fishing communities, but with all interests in Scotland about the benefits of EU membership, the ability it gives you to try to argue for change from the top table, but the ability to keep the place in the world's biggest trading market, which I think we lose at our peril. Fraser, in terms of your questions, on the referendum point, I mean, I've made very clear, I'll make clear again today, I'm interested in having a legal referendum that has a sound legal basis that is legitimate, so that the outcome of it is accepted domestically and at a European and international level. In my view, there's not much point in having a referendum process that can deliver effective independence. I think people look at the impasse between the Scottish Government and the UK Government just now and think, oh, that will never be broken. I do not believe that is the case. And I don't believe Boris Johnson and the UK Government thinks that either. If we continue to see support for independence rise, as we have been doing, if we continue to see demand for that choice continue to grow, then ultimately you cannot stand in the way of that clear democratic choice. And the reason I believe that Boris Johnson knows that is because if you look closely at his utterances and behaviour around this, he is somebody that realises that he has to make an argument for the union and against independence. And there's talk of the UK government spending large amounts of taxpayers' money on adverts in Scotland to extol the virtues of the union. Why would you do that if you think you can stop people in Scotland forever having the choice? So democracy will prevail. My job is to continue to increase support for independence so that it becomes an unanswerable case for that choice to be made. On the issues, we will, as I said in my remarks, we'll set out very detailed propositions updating the case that we made in 2014 on all of those issues. On currency, we argued for a currency union in 2014. As it happens, I think that would have happened if Scotland had voted for independence then. My party has looked at that position again. We will use sterling until such times as it's right to move to a Scottish currency, and obviously that will be an issue that we take full account of in any discussions with the European Union. And on the point about borders, it's not independence that threatens borders, it's Brexit that does that. It's the approach to Brexit that has been taken. One of the reasons why I'll continue to argue for the relationship to be as close as possible. But obviously when we see where the UK-EU relationship ends up, then I can work out, the Scottish Government can work out how we mitigate that in a Scottish sense, and we'll be frank and open with people as we proceed through those discussions.
Thanks. I'm very tempted to ban questions on fish, but not sure I can enforce it. So I've seen those two, and then...
Thank you. John Clark from the European Commission. My question is not about fish. First Minister, you've spoken about the people of Scotland having the right to choose their own future, and the UK is a voluntary union of nations. Now, a lot of distinguished lawyers and political commentators have made the case that Scotland, under international law, does not need the permission of the UK government either for a referendum or to declare independence. You can go ahead without the permission of Westminster. But indeed, the UK government has made the very same argument at the International Court of Justice in the case of Kosovo, arguing that Kosovo did not need the permission of the state it belonged to. So why do you feel the need to have a referendum? Why don't you simply declare independence as is permitted under international law?
Do you want me to do it now or later? Just so I'm clear.
Sorry, I'm from the Parliament magazine. If you fail to get what you want, your second referendum, if you fail to get the second referendum, what is the plan B? What do you do then? Can you say, if there is a plan B, and if so, what exactly is it, please?
Yeah, my name is Matthijs Schiffers from Het Financiële Dagblad, the Dutch Financial Times. I would like to hear your thoughts about a bridge between Northern Ireland and Scotland. Northern Ireland has some kind of special situation now after Brexit. Would that give you some arguments to ask for the same if you're connected to this part of the world?
Okay. John, I'll take your question in two parts quickly. Why bother with a referendum and not simply declare independence? Is because I am a Democrat. I think in order to legitimately become independent, we have to demonstrate in Scotland that it is the will of a majority of people in Scotland. Now, we have opinion polls suggesting that independence now has majority support, but I think that has to be demonstrated by people voting positively for that. I don't believe we can short-circuit the need to demonstrate that it is the will of the majority, and therefore that's why I say we have to have a process that demonstrates rather than, however tempting it may be for me simply to declare it, I suspect I may have difficulty in getting others to recognise that. The second part of the question is, why don't we have a referendum without the agreement of the UK government? And I should say the ability or otherwise of the Scottish Parliament and government to do that has never been tested in court. We have the legislation that set up the Scottish Parliament has as what's called a reserved competence of Westminster, the Constitution. But whether that gives the Scottish Parliament or government any powers to hold a referendum without the agreement of the UK government hasn't been tested. I'm not ruling out, and I've never ruled out that at some point, if this impasse continues, it may have to be tested. But, you know, putting things in the hands of the courts is always uncertain in terms of the outcome. And actually, I think what we should be doing is seeking agreement to allowing the people of Scotland to have that choice. And I think the way to break that impasse is actually to make the support for and case for independence so strong that no Prime Minister, even Boris Johnson, can stand in the way of that. And, you know, in answer to the second question, that's my plan A, B and C. I think ultimately this is a democratic issue that should be resolved democratically and politically. And, you know, if we see support for Scottish independence continuing to be strong and become stronger, then whatever his bluff and bluster may suggest at the moment, then Boris Johnson or any other Prime Minister is not going to be able to stand in the way of that. And then on to his bridge from Scotland to Northern Ireland. I should say Boris Johnson, I think, has promised lots of physical bridges in his political career so far. He hasn't delivered, to the best of my knowledge, a single one of them. Look, I bow to nobody in my ambitions for Scotland and in my ambitions for Scotland to be, you know, connected to Ireland and to Europe. But I do think there are big practical questions over the feasibility and deliverability of this, not just the distance, but the depth of the water. There's an old munitions dump underneath it. You know, we'll see where it goes. I certainly don't close my eyes or close my mind to suggestions like this, but I suspect from Boris Johnson it's more a diversionary tactic to have people talking about that rather than some of the real issues we're grappling with in both Scotland and Ireland. So I would say if he's got £20 billion or whatever it might take to build such a bridge, go and spare it just now. I'm sure both the Scottish Government and the Northern Ireland Executive could find lots of ways to spend it on possibly more important priorities.
Hi, Dave Clark from Agence France Presse. My question's about the negotiations for the future free trade agreement, specifically about fish. As far as we understand it, the negotiating mandate that Monsieur Barnier is going to take to London includes the demand that we uphold the current quota system. As you've just said, that would break Boris Johnson's promise to Scottish fishermen. which way should he go? Should he unblock the talks by giving way on fish, or should he stick by his promise to become an independent coastal state?
Thanks. First Minister Roddy Thompson, freelance. Couple of questions. If I could ask specifically about reports that the European Commission has reacted, obviously, to the projection of the Europe-Scotland love stunt in the days after Brexit. And secondly, you touched on this, I think, in your last answer, but Joanna Cherry seems to have pushed the point that the possibility to test the legal argument behind a referendum that might be driven by the Scottish Parliament, do you recognise that that may have a stronger case while Scotland is still subject to ECJ arbitration during transition?
No, I don't think that last point is particularly relevant on that point. On the issue of a legal challenge, I kind of set out my own views on this 10 days ago. I don't think we should rule that out, but if you're asking me where I think we should expend our energy on a legal process with an uncertain outcome, or in building the political case for independence and for an independence referendum, I choose the latter. That is my judgment. And that judgment, that balance of judgment may change as time goes on, but that is my judgment at the moment. On the question, you know, the independent coastal state promise was one that was made and made very expressly and very strongly. And, you know, I think Boris Johnson has to find a way of delivering on the promise to the fishing community around the independence and control and access points, while also securing access to markets. I don't pretend that that is an easy circle for him to square, but it was his party that made the promises, and you know, I think there'll be lots of people in Scotland looking to see how he delivers on that. So it's not an either or. The promise was both, and you know, it's over to him. That was on that point.
The projection.
Oh, sorry, the projection. I've only just seen comments from the Commission as I came in, but the only comment I've had here today, as I've been sort of going around my meetings this morning, has been entirely positive about what seems to have been interpreted as a really positive show of love and solidarity from Scotland to Europe. So I've not met anybody here today who's been particularly upset or at all upset by it. I think one of the points the Commission appeared to make is that it's not the first time a message has been projected onto the Bellymont, and I'm sure it won't be the last. And whether it's the Commission building or the Houses of Commons and Big Ben in London or the Scottish Parliament in Edinburgh, it's quite a common and well-tried way of sending a message and making a point, and it was a very strong point of solidarity from Scotland to the European Union.
There were two in the back.
Yeah, well, thank you. Joe Barnes from the Daily Express. Just to go back to the point of the illumination, the Commission have actually phoned the police, or the Belgian police, and referred, because it's not legal in Belgium. So could you kind of refer to that? Have you been spoken to by the authorities in Belgium about the illumination?
No.
Okay.
They're outside.
That answer both questions back there. Okay, there's one there.
Thanks. Oh, you just need to speak, really. Nick Guthrie from The Sun. You mentioned earlier about setting out a roadmap for joining the EU and waiting for the result of the UK talks. But how long do you expect accession realistically to take to the EU? And would you look to negotiate a withdrawal agreement and transition with the UK while you did that? Or would you look to leave straight away if you got independence? And if I could very quickly ask a question on behalf of my Scottish colleagues, as we were talking about the police just now. Have you had any contact from the police about the conduct of your ex-finance minister? And do you think he should now quit the Scottish Parliament? Thank you.
In answer to that last question, no, I certainly haven't. And on the question of being an MSP or not, I absolutely understand the sentiment that is being expressed around that. I'm sure Derek Mackay will be reflecting carefully on that. It's not a decision for me. I cannot force somebody to resign as a member of the Scottish Parliament. There's obviously in the SNP a process underway following his suspension last week, and as is always the case in these situations, I don't want to say anything that interferes with that process. On the question of transition and timing of that, as was the case in 2014, following a vote for independence, of course, there would be a period of transition. We set out the detail of that in 2014, and that will be part of the proposition that we update in the months to come. And you know, obviously, the parallel process of Scotland re-establishing membership of the European Union, we will set out the detail of how we see those two positions and those two timescales overlapping.
So we've got time for one last round of questions, if there are any pressing ones. I will add one, and then I'll take that one as well. Just in terms of how we move forward from here, one of the big issues we're facing is the time limitations. We have less than 11 months to not only negotiate but to ratify this agreement. There's a lot of agreement that the complexity of that is such that even if we only aim for a very minimal agreement, this could be extremely challenging. Do you think the Prime Minister might change his mind in terms of asking for an extension or not? But I'll take the other question as well, and then I'll give you a final round.
Juliana Dalpino. I'm representing a coalition called All Policies for a Healthy Europe. And my question is regarding, once ascending to the European Union, the ambitions and possibilities of making the European Union an economy of well-being.
Thank you. On the point around extension, I think we have to assume right now that what the UK government says about refusing to countenance a further extension is what they mean, because I think you have to take people at their word and at face value, and I think it would be dangerous, given the tightness of time, to assume that, you know, at the 11th hour, last minute, there's going to be a change of heart. That said, it's not beyond the bounds of possibility, and it certainly would be not contrary to past behaviour. If Boris Johnson did change his position, he would probably assert that his position was exactly the same as it had always been, even though it had changed in reality. So I wouldn't rule that out, but I don't think we should operate on the basis that that is going to ride to anybody's rescue. And on the last point, which is a really good question to end on, I am a great enthusiast for the notion of a well-being economy, of seeing well-being and happiness and the health of a population as important as the economic growth of a country. Scotland is part of an alliance with Iceland and New Zealand, which we're hoping to see other countries join in the not too distant future to, you know, build support for that. And I think there is, based on discussions I've had here and with various interests in the European Union, I think there is an open door and an appetite to see Europe embrace that, and it's something I would certainly very strongly encourage.
Thank you very much, First Ministers. I think we had a good discussion, maybe a bit too much fisheries, but and we didn't quite get the declaration of Scottish independence in the EPC, but certainly contrary to some of the comments I received on Twitter, there will be a Scottish-EU relationship. We don't know what that relationship is going to look like. There's a lot of uncertainty at the moment, but certainly it helps us for you to come here and to explain how the Scottish government sees it and what you see in the coming years and the ambitions you have for Scotland to come back to the European Union as a member state. So thank you very much for coming today, and I'm sure we will welcome you again in future. Thank you.
There ain't no man can't save me. There ain't no man can enslave me. Ain't no man, a man that can change the shape my soul is in. There ain't nobody here who can cause me pain, erase my fear, cause I got only love to share. If you're looking for truth and proof, you'll find it there. You got to serve something, ain't that right? I know it gets dark, but there's always a light. You don't have to buy in to get into the club. Trade your worries. You gotta show up if you wanna be seen. If it matters to you, ma, it matters to me. I'm gonna fall hard, yeah, I know I am. When the clouds crack up, I laugh with them. There ain't no man can't save me. There ain't no man can enslave me. Ain't no man, a man that can change the shape my soul is in. There ain't nobody here who can cause me pain, erase my fear, cause I got only love to share. If you're looking for truth and proof, you'll find it there. You say you look funny, I say you're a star. I say you're whatever you think you are. Watching naysayers fall right in line. If we believe it, they'll say, she is so pretty, he is so fine. There ain't no man can't save me. There ain't no man can enslave me. There ain't no man, a man that can change the shape my soul is in. There ain't nobody here who can cause me pain, erase my fear, cause I got only love to share. If you're looking for truth and proof, you'll find it there. You got to go somewhere, ain't that true? Not a whole lot of time for me or you. Got a whole lot of reasons to be mad, let's not pick one. I live in a room at the top of the stairs, got my windows wide open and nobody cares. And I got no choice but to get right up when the sun comes through. Ain't no man can't save me. There ain't no man can enslave me. There ain't no man, a man that can change the shape my soul is in. There ain't nobody here who can cause me pain, erase my fear, cause I got only love to share. If you're looking for truth and proof, you'll find it there. If you're looking for truth and proof, you'll find it there. If you're looking for truth and proof, you'll find it.
And it feels like yours was the only heart to break. When you come back home and all the lights are out, and you're getting used to no one else being around. Oh, I'll be there when you need a little love. I got a little love to share. Yeah, I'm gonna come through. You'll never be alone. I'll be there for you. I'll be there, yeah, yeah. I'll be there for you. I'll be there, yeah, yeah. I'll be there for you.
everybody. Good morning. How y'all doing today? Good. Awesome. My name's Sean. I'm the local organizer here in the Plymouth region. Thank you all for coming. With just 24 hours left until we start voting. Who's excited? Good. Awesome. I know we are all anxiously waiting to hear Pete, but before he speaks, I wanted to share a few words about why it is going to be so important to get involved with these final moments of the campaign here in New Hampshire. All right. So when I first heard Pete speak about the crisis of belonging, I knew exactly what he was talking about. I grew up here in New Hampshire, and I was living in New York City, and I felt like I was living in a country of micro-communities where everyone was disconnected and living in their own bubbles. I didn't feel like I could reach out to my neighbors or try and connect with folks who were outside of my immediate social circle. Pete in this campaign showed me and gave me hope because we as Americans actually share so much and agree on so many things, and actually we have a great capacity to accept each other. I still believe that this is a country of micro-communities, but I also believe that those micro-communities can be connected by a feeling of national identity and a strong sense of belonging. But it's up to us. We as a campaign are working hard to create a future where, as Pete says, the American experience is defined not by exclusion, but by belonging. And here's what you can do to help us create that future in these last moments and make sure that Pete is the next president of the United States. First, directly following this event, we are going to be knocking doors here in the region to make sure that everybody knows where and when they are able to vote tomorrow. Next, I want you to make a plan to vote. And make sure that all of your friends and family make a plan to vote. Ask yourself, where do I vote? When am I going to the polls? How am I going to get there, especially if it's snowing? Who am I going to bring with me? And what documents do I need to ensure that I'm able to vote? I know these might seem like small questions, but asking yourself these actually takes voting from an abstract idea and turns it into a logistical plan and actually increases voter turnout. So, make a plan to vote and make sure everyone you know does the same. Finally, I want to give a nod to our local Plymouth area Democrats. Go ahead, give a wave. That's right, give them an extra clap. They're working hard. Tomorrow, they're going to be coordinating busing and rides to the polls for students and community members, which is just so fantastic. We know that the more people that vote, that's better for our democracy. So in order to learn more, I want you all to connect with them after the event and also congratulate them for all the hard work they're doing. And final thing I want to ask y'all. Can we count on you to vote tomorrow and bring home another win here in New Hampshire for Pete? Yes. Awesome. Thank you all so much. It is now my great pleasure to introduce the former student body president and proud alum of Plymouth State and current state representative, Matt Wilhelm.
Hey, let's give it up one more time for Sean. Friends, this is it. We're in the final 24 hours before the first in the nation presidential primary. There's no place I'd rather be than right here at Plymouth State University. As Sean said, I'm a proud alum of this fine institution. This was the place where I really got clear on my purpose, on my passion for politics, for public service. This is the place where I first registered to vote right here in Plymouth and voted in the 2000 presidential election. This is the place where we hosted presidential candidates in 2004, the contenders who were the hopefuls that were hoping to put their name on the ballot and make their case to the people of Plymouth. And this is the place where I learned about AmeriCorps. And right after I graduated from Plymouth State, I did 2 years of AmeriCorps with an organization called City Year New Hampshire, working with high-need young people to help focus on attendance, behavior, course performance, keep them on school and on track to graduate. And I really got excited about this big idea of national service. Wanted to figure out ways that we could expand AmeriCorps so that a voluntary year of paid national service became a common expectation for young people in this country. I ran for state rep in 2018 during the midterm election, frankly because after the 2016 election felt like I needed to do more, to step up in some way and serve my community. When I got to the legislature, we started taking action on national service and tried to figure out how can we strengthen workforce pathways from AmeriCorps programs to post-secondary education. I see a lot of students here. And career, so that if you do a year of service, it's more than just the stipend and a small education award. It's also a pathway to an affordable degree and a really meaningful career in the state of New Hampshire. We need more of these civic-minded, community-driven young people to stay here in the Granite State and power our economy for years to come. So when I had the opportunity over the last year to engage with presidential candidates, as a state rep, you have this unique opportunity to really engage, to sit down and have conversations with people who are vying to be the leader of the free world. And I would always ask about plans for national service. When I sat down at a round table with Mayor Pete Buttigieg in Manchester, this is probably in March or April, I didn't have to ask the question. He actually saw my AmeriCorps lapel pin and asked me if I was an alum and what I had done during my year of service. This is an Afghanistan war veteran, a Navy intelligence officer who deeply values that experience of serving alongside diverse Americans from all different backgrounds and walks of life, and understands that by expanding civilian national service, we can provide that opportunity for more young people in this country, so that it can be a shared common expectation that folks can work side by side, solve our nation's biggest challenges through service, and make a difference for our country. I was struck in February, and it's actually interesting on the eve of the presidential primary to look back at how far this campaign has come. A year ago, Pete hadn't even set foot in the state of New Hampshire. He was polling at 0. Even just a name ID, people didn't know who he was, let alone how to say his last name. And I remember going to Raymond at the advice of a friend who went to college with Pete to go check it out, to see what this guy was all about. And what I was struck by that day was his ability to connect with people by really mapping out what his values are, which I think offered clarity for a lot of people around not just his values, but Democratic Party values and, frankly, American values. Getting back to that sort of values proposition is really critical. And there were months that went by before we saw any policy from Pete, but his first policy plan was his national service plan. He wants to expand AmeriCorps from 65,000 to 250,000 members, fully funding the Edward M. Kennedy Serve America Act, on its way to expanding AmeriCorps to 1 million members every single year. I knew in that moment, even though it was so early on in the campaign, and that this was a campaign that didn't necessarily, a lot of people were writing it off. But I knew that this was a campaign that I wanted to be a part of because of those values and because of the policies that grew out of them. I'm really excited to be here. I cannot believe how far this campaign has come. And to be back here at Plymouth State, again, where I learned about my public service journey and where it really started, it's really meaningful and really excited to welcome the man that I believe should be the next Commander-in-Chief and the President of the United States, Mayor Pete Buttigieg. Now, I just want to make one more case here. I know a lot of people have been talking about electability over the course of this campaign. There was a recent poll that came out that showed that Mayor Pete beats Donald Trump by 10 points here in the state of New Hampshire. And this is why I think it's important. Right now, Democrats have control of the New Hampshire House of Representatives, and we have control of the New Hampshire State Senate. And there's a record number, 57 vetoes by Governor Sununu this past year on legislation that's really important, like raising the minimum wage and paid family and medical leave. 57 vetoes. If we want to retain our majorities in the legislature and send a new governor to the corner office, we need someone like Mayor Pete at the top of the ticket so that we can win big in November. Friends, it is my pleasure to introduce the former CEO and the chairman of Stonyfield Farm Yogurt. For real, he didn't bring the yogurt with him, though. I want to break that to him so he doesn't have to himself. Please help me welcome Gary Hirschberg.
Hello, Plymouth. I have laryngitis, too much support for Pete, but I'm going to keep going until we get there. Thank you for this amazing turnout. Look, Pete's going to get out here in just a moment. I just wanted to say a couple of words about why I'm working so hard for this guy to be our next president. And let me just say simply, tomorrow, in my mind, is the most consequential election in our lifetimes, bar none. I'm, as many old friends here know, I've been active in the climate space for decades. The time for action on climate is past, but it's certainly now. And we cannot stand 4 more years of a denier in chief in this corner office. So this is critical. And of course, we could talk about many other issues, but that's the whopper. So look, I'll just tell you very quickly why I got on board with Team Pete over a year ago. I'm looking for 3 things, and I think we all should be looking for them. Number 1, absolute understanding of the issues here. And I'll start with climate. Pete's policies on climate, bar none, are the best of any candidate out there. $250 billion of job-creating programs focused on work in the communities. It's something that bipartisan across the spectrum, bipartisan folks should understand and support. There are 500 policy advisors in the Pete campaign. No campaign has that. This is an extraordinary intellectual pool of folks who absolutely get this stuff. But more importantly, it's the ability to communicate these issues. And this is why Pete in Iowa was either first or second with every single demographic, because he speaks in a way that we all can understand, which is to say he understands these issues critically. Number 2, executive temperament, something absolutely lacking in the White House right now. This is not a legislative job. This is an executive job, and we've got to remember this. Senators are great for being set. This is not a legislative or policy job. This is somebody who has actually been an executive. And I remind you, Pete right now has more executive experience than Barack Obama had when he came into office. Don't forget that. And number 3, and I think this is what's so critical to us in Plymouth. I live next door in Holderness. We need to get out of the Washington box. It is broken, right? The whole damn system is broken. We need structural change. We need campaign finance reform. But fundamentally, we need somebody who is speaking to the hearts and minds and souls of Americans. I grew up in New Hampshire. I'm a 3rd-generation manufacturer. My father ran shoe factories and grandfather in Newmarket, Pittsfield, Laconia, Berwick, Maine, Manchester. And so I enjoyed the boom of the shoe industry when I was very young. Many of you here remember those days. And I also remember the bust. And when those businesses went out due to cheap foreign labor, I watched the heart get sucked out of our communities. And you've seen it here in Plymouth. You've seen it in so many communities, former mill towns, right? And the thing is that what brought these communities back was not Washington-based policies. It was somebody who understood and could speak to public-private partnerships, who could stimulate local entrepreneurship. We didn't bring Pittsfield out of the darkness and Newmarket because we got great federal largesse. We did it because we pooled together across party lines. It was a nonpartisan effort with people who understand the role and power of government. And Pete understands that cold. You've seen this day in, day out here. He has the temperament. Note how he how he reacted to the really bitter and absurd attacks. And how he's just level set. Note his, as you'll hear in a moment, his incredible know-how on the issues. But fundamentally understand that he's speaking for us out here in Plymouth in all of our communities in New Hampshire, folks who have not felt Washington talking to us or working for us for a very, very long time. It's time to get out of the Washington box, and this guy can do it. I need to say one last thing before I bring Pete out. There's been all this talk about billionaires and millionaires, and let me just say very bluntly, two of my, I think Bernie's amazing, right? I have an enormous amount of respect for him. But two of my greatest friends in business, Ben and Jerry, both millionaires many times over than me, have been the primary advocates for Bernie right here. So let's not worry about that, okay? What's critical right now is beating Donald Trump, right? That is what is essential. So let's keep our eye on the ball. Let's not split among ourselves. Whatever happens after Tuesday and whatever happens after this primary, we all have to agree right now, hands up, we're going to beat Donald Trump. We're going to be united, right? All right, let me bring you the guy who I think is most capable of uniting us to beat Donald Trump, Mayor Pete Buttigieg. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Gary Hirschberg, for demonstrating how environmental stewardship and business run the right way can help move us forward, and thank you for your support. Thank you to Matt Wilhelm, who embodies the spirit of service that I know is so natural here in New Hampshire. That idea that if you see something that needs to be different, you see something that needs to change, you don't ask the question, why don't they fix it? Why don't they do this differently? You say, why don't we? Why don't I? And that is the idea that animates our national service vision, and I know it's the idea that animates folks like Matt, both in their service through efforts like AmeriCorps and the extraordinary service that's going on in your state legislature right now. We just got to get more of it through the veto pen of the governor, which is why we're going to need a nominee with coattails to help make sure that every state in the union gets good leadership. And thanks to all of you for braving some weather that I imagine was arranged just to make me feel right at home, because this is pretty much how South Bend looks in February with our lake effect, and still making it through to spend some time together as we come into the final hours of this process that we've been in for more than a year now. And I know how seriously New Hampshire voters take the responsibility, take the influence, take the thumb on the scale that you have by virtue of being here in this first-in-the-nation primary. And so I know that in addition to supporters who are here, who I want to thank for helping to spread the word, there are folks here who are still thinking through your choices. The same people who maybe came out of curiosity to see me and about 20 other people a year ago, and by 6 months ago, we're starting to winnow the field. In your very New Hampshire way, you'd say things to me like, that speech is pretty good. I think you're in my top 7 now. That was good. And now it's decision time, and it's coming down to this. How do we make sure that we are ready to win and that we are ready to govern with the stakes as high as they have ever been in an American presidential election? And to guide the conversation we're going to have, let me start by asking you to form in your mind an image that I always ask voters to picture, because I picture it every day, and it guides this campaign in many ways. And it's the image of what it's going to be like the first time that the sun comes up over the mountains and lakes of New Hampshire and Donald Trump is no longer the president of the United States. It feels good to remember that day's coming, right? And just to know that one way or the other that day will in fact come, that it is in our future, and that we will be able to put the corruption behind us and put the chaos behind us and put the tweets behind us. Won't that be nice? I think we're all ready for that. So the question is, how do we make sure that we bring that day about? First of all, I think it means ensuring that we have the strongest possible candidate looking to the future, because that's how Democrats win, with a message that brings us together. See, when I talk about how much we're looking forward to moving past this presidency, I don't even think that's a partisan statement anymore. I mean, I'm meeting not only so many fellow Democrats who've been working the whole time to make that come about, but here in this state with its famous independent streak, I see so many independents who feel just as passionate about this as dyed-in-the-wool Democrats, and a striking number of what I like to call future former Republicans who are more than welcome to join us in this struggle, because even if we can't agree on everything, we can absolutely agree that the time has come to turn the page on this president and on the situation that this country is in. That's what we have to do right now. Come together and deliver a solution. But knowing how much depends on bringing Americans together, we cannot risk alienating Americans at this critical moment. And that's where I part ways with my friend Senator Sanders. And I know we're in the neighborhood. He's from right across the river, and I respect his intentions. But I also am so concerned at a moment like this, where we have an extraordinary historic American majority, for example, ready to deliver health care for every American, ready to act to ensure that there is no such thing as an uninsured American, just so long as we don't force every American onto that public plan. That's the opportunity in front of us, or the risk if we take it all the way to the extreme. This is a moment for bringing as many people as we can into the picture. But a picture where your only choices are between a revolution or the status quo is a picture where most of us don't see ourselves. Right now, we have to harness that American majority ready to come together and deliver big and meaningful change, but expecting that that change can also be accounted for. So when you look at Senator Sanders' math, $25 trillion worth of revenue, a lot of it coming from areas that we could agree on. I think we all agree that the wealthy and corporations need to pay their fair share. I have a harder time agreeing with the idea of raising taxes on the middle class. He's proposed income over $29,000 being taxed to pay for health care plans. But on that, at least let's give credit where credit is due, because he's being honest about it. But here's the problem. There's $50 trillion worth of spending. So about half of it is unaccounted for. And there's no explanation for where the other $25 trillion is supposed to come from. How are we going to pay for it? Are we going to pay for it in the form of still further taxes? Or are we going to pay for it in the form of broken promises? Either way, we have to choose a responsible approach that can actually get big things done and answer the question of how we're going to get from point A to point B. One thing I've also seen about New Hampshire is a famously practical body of American voters, ready to envision big things, but insisting that there is a roadmap for how to get there. And the moment that we live in is one with an extraordinary majority ready to do bolder things than we've ever done. An American consensus that would help make the next presidency the most progressive we've yet had, and yet can do it together as long as we don't go chasing after the extremes. Think about it. Even more than what was available to President Obama just 10 years ago, we have an American majority right now ready not just to make sure there's no such thing as an uninsured American, but ready to make sure there's no such thing as an unaffordable prescription. We are ready right now to bring an end to the era when corporations can pay $0 on billions of dollars in profits, and ready to raise wages and empower workers, including gig workers and others in an economy that's rapidly shifting. We have an American majority ready to act to honor our troops, not just with a bumper sticker, but with an end to endless war and a commander-in-chief who would never send them into harm's way without a good reason. We have a strong American majority here in the state that goes by the motto of live free or die, that understands that American freedom includes keeping government out of the business of dictating to women what their reproductive health care choices ought to be. Ready to ensure we take the steps now in our time to make this a country where your race has no bearing on your health or your wealth or your access to excellent education or your experience with law enforcement. We are ready to go now to take those steps. This is a country that supports our next generation, supports our schools, and supports our teachers, and insists that the next Secretary of Education be somebody who actually believes in public education. This is the majority we must galvanize, not polarize, not only in order to win, and it is so important that we win, but in order to govern. Don't let anybody tell you got to choose between listening to your head and listening to your heart. between the best way to govern well and the right way to win big. All of that turns on harnessing this American majority and adding to it with as many people as we can, so that we win so big that we not only bring an end to the Trump presidency, but we put Trumpism in the dustbin of history with it. And I got to tell you that the stories that strike me the most on the campaign trail are not just encounters with voters, they're encounters with Americans not yet old enough to vote, asking some of the most searching and memorable questions of this campaign. An 11-year-old sticks up his hand at an event to ask what's going on with the affordability of prescription drugs. Not because he's an emerging healthcare policy buff, but because he needs insulin and he's wondering whether his family will continue to be able to afford it and whether he will when he leaves his home that he grew up in. He shouldn't be worried about that. We should take care of that so that he doesn't have to, and he can't wait for us to act on the affordability of prescription medication. A 13-year-old let me know that she had asked for a bulletproof backpack for Christmas. I didn't even know that was a thing that existed. We're living at a moment where kids are getting active shooter drills before they were old enough to learn how to read. They can't wait for us to act to make sure the Second Amendment can no longer be twisted into an excuse to do nothing at all on gun violence and protect our children. And when a 10-year-old who got off on the right foot with me because he showed up at an event in a rolled-up white shirt and a blue tie and let me know that he had been elected mayor of his class at school, raises his hand and very politely points out that he's planning to be here in the year 2100. And that when he is, he will look back on what we did in 2020 and ask whether we took the steps necessary to create a climate that he and his future kids and grandkids could thrive in. He and that generation cannot wait for us to act on climate change and lead the world in doing something about it. The time is now. We have got to act. And this is our chance to make it happen. This is our shot, our only shot to defeat Donald Trump. I know that last week was depressing for a lot of us watching the news, watching the way the Senate GOP turned a trial into a sham and a foregone conclusion. And I know that that creates a sense of exhaustion that may tempt some of us to turn it off and walk away altogether, which is, of course, exactly how the cynics would win, exactly what we cannot allow to happen. But the good news is, the great thing about being a voter in the year 2020 is that we get the final say. The Senate may have been the jury last week, but we're the jury now, and the final verdict is up to us when it comes to this president and an awful lot of those senators. So let's make sure we use that power to bring about the change we need to see. This is our chance. And this is our opportunity to turn the page and deliver on the issues that the next president will face, some of which were barely even thought of a few years ago. Not only climate change leaping off the pages of science journals and into our lives, but overseas threats like global health security problems and cybersecurity attacks. And right here at home, an economy being radically transformed by technology, by gig work, things we weren't thinking about just a few years ago. Now's our chance to do something about it. And in that process, to also just establish a sense of public decency once again, where even or especially when we disagree, we do not forget that we are part of this same American project. The way service members are reminded, working together under tough conditions, trusting one another with their lives, and the way each of us can be reminded just by participating in the extraordinary civic ritual that is the democratic process. This is our chance to get it right. And this, I believe, is what the presidency is uniquely able to help guide. That it's not just about the laws that you sign. It's not just about the administration that you run. It is about the tone that you set. That is part of the function of this office. To put it another way, I'm seeking this office not because I got it into my head that I'd like to occupy it, but because of what it can do and what it is for. I'm asking for your vote because I believe the presidency has a purpose, and the purpose of our American presidency is not the glorification of the president, but the unification and the empowerment of the American people to do these big things. That's why I'm asking for your support, and that's why I hope you'll vote for me tomorrow evening. So, having shared what I'm about, I'd like to invite a Representative Matt Wilhelm back out. We've gathered up questions from folks on your way in. He's got our famous fishbowl. This one's our famous bucket. And looking forward to having a conversation. If it's your question, give a holler, so I'm looking in the right direction.
All right, this first question is from Tyler Austin. Where's Tyler? Right there. Tyler's question is, what's your plan with mental health and the youth struggling with it?
Thank you, first of all, for raising this, because this is so important. And this is another example of where it's partly about policy and it's partly about culture. So the policies are clear. We need more providers in the mental health field to begin with. We need to make sure that reimbursement and compensation is high enough that it encourages more people to go into the field. One of the things we talked about in national service is a community health corps that would give people who are entering public service a year of experience helping on issues related to addiction or mental health, and in that process, hopefully inspire some of them to make it a career. We need to make sure that we decriminalize addiction and that we make it possible for there to be more prescriptions for the kind of medication-assisted therapy that we know is an important part of battling a lot of addictions. So there's step after step after step we need to take policy-wise and fund it federally. But recognize that a lot of the issues are different in different parts of the country. And so we call them healing and belonging grants that are federally funded but based on locally designed plans. This is maybe a mayor's eye view of the world, but I think not all of the answers have to come from Washington, but more of the funding should. So those are some of the policy moves we got to make. But in order for us to change the policies, I think we've got to change the way we as a country talk about this too. And this might be the most important thing of all. This is worth doing, actually. I do this sometimes. Just ask you, if you or somebody you love, somebody in your workplace or somebody in your family has encountered an issue with serious mental illness or with addiction, just a quick show of hands. Okay. So this is just about everybody. So how is it that we still talk about it like it's some specialty issue that just affects a handful of people? This is all of us. All of us are affected by this, and we need to create a culture, and I will set this tone from the top, where it is as routine to go seek an emotional health checkup as a physical, as natural to talk about a struggle with bipolar disorder as it would be to talk about a struggle with cancer, as okay to let folks know you're facing addiction, as to let folks know you got a knee surgery coming up. If we do that and remind those who are facing these struggles that you have nothing to be ashamed of, it makes all of the other pieces a lot easier, and I promise to set that tone and work with everybody to speak up and raise these issues so that they're fully heard.
All right. This next question is, how will you rewrite a country with historical polarization? Ezra Klein says that the right plays identity politics while the left waxes a something policy. No one listening or hearing. Whose question was that?
Okay. Did we get it right? Yeah. So, well, first of all, I think that analysis is right. The White House has mastered a form of white identity politics that is destructive to everybody. And this is a moment when we need to come together, not by papering over our differences. We should acknowledge and celebrate identity. But the way it's being weaponized by this White House is frightening. And this isn't just about policy. This is about whether everyone has an equal share and claim on the American project. I think that's one of the fundamental questions at stake right now. and whether we're talking about racial injustice, systemic racism, and racial inequality, which in many ways, by the way, has actually gotten worse in our time. Proof that simply deleting a racist policy and replacing it with a neutral one isn't enough to bring us to equality. Or the political division that's going on in all kinds of directions, which, by the way, is also being cleverly weaponized and exploited by our adversaries, because our divisions have become a national security vulnerability known to places like Russia as something that they can drive wedges through. This will not be easy to overcome. But so much depends on us getting this right. And the first thing I'll say, as far as the plan to deal with it, is that it can't just be the president. This president said, "I alone can fix it," when he took office. Never believe anybody who says they alone can fix it. But here's what can make a difference. First of all, again, the tone that you set. Secondly, making sure that we back it up with policies that create a shared reality. This is why we're so passionate about national service. When I was deployed, people so different from me, not just racially or regionally, but politically, for sure, philosophically, would be in my vehicle, and they didn't care if I was going home to a boyfriend or a girlfriend or what country my dad immigrated from. We trusted each other with our lives because we had a job to do. Part of the virtue of national service is helping more Americans get that experience without having to go to war in order to get it. And I'm looking for opportunities to break down those barriers so that we just have a shared experience of reality. It's why quality public education is so important. If public education is something that everybody from every walk of life seeks out, then schools become part of that place where the community building happens. It's why I believe in cutting across different media bubbles. It's a bit controversial within my party, but I don't hesitate to go on Fox News quite often. Because how can I blame somebody for not hearing our message or our view if they've literally not encountered it? Which means I have a responsibility to make sure it gets through to those viewers. And that's why we do those town halls. So the more we act to make sure that we're in a common reality, the more we can see the humanity in one another. This is a moment where we should look through everything from shared stories to shared lived experiences on ways to bring us together, even or especially when we disagree. It's not pretending we won't disagree. That's okay. But we have to be part of the same effort at the end of the day. And this is instinct for a mayor. Because when you're a mayor, you are a walking symbol of the unity of your city. You remind people who have nothing in common besides the city they live in that they have something in common there. And that's even more true for the job of a president. That's part of how a president earns their paycheck, in addition to all the policy work, is making sure that you are a touchstone that reminds people they're part of America. And that's where I firmly believe that Democrats and independents and Republicans, people of different generations and religious traditions and races, we can even bring together ice cream and yogurt to know that we are part of the same overall reality. And especially when we disagree, to do it in the name of the shared American values that unite us as a country.
All right, so this plays off that same theme. How do you plan to unify the Democratic Party and the country?
All right. So here's the good news. This is primary season. It's the heat of competition. Elbows will find their way out a little bit. But we really do share the same values, certainly broadly as Americans, but very specifically as Democrats. Look, the differences we're talking about are differences mostly in approach, not differences in where the country's got to go. Not only within, but beyond the boundaries of the Democratic Party, folks agree that we need to raise wages and empower workers and support the future of education, do something about climate, keep each other safe from gun violence. It's very clear what we've got to do. The question is just how are we going to go about doing it? And I'm making the case for us to do it with a look to the future and for us to do it in a way that includes as many people and alienates as few people as possible. And look, let's remember, at the end of the day, the 25 people, something like that, ran for president in my party. Approximately 24 will not get to be the nominee. The moment we've identified the one who is, all of us have to unify around that person and get the job done.
All right, so this is the last question. If you become the nominee and take the debate stage next to President Trump, do you confront him on his lies and bigotry, or hold back for fear of offending his base?
So here's my approach. And again, if I was you, give a wave so I'm looking in the right direction. Although I imagine that's on a lot of people's minds. Here's how I approach this president. He's kind of like, you ever seen those Chinese finger traps where the harder you pull, the more you get stuck in them? He's kind of like that, but with our attention. He has this knack for commanding our attention through outrage. So here's the trick. When he lies, you have to confront it. When he does something wrong, you have to stand up to it. And yet, a big part of this is to make sure he can't suck all of the attention in his direction. So will I call him out? Absolutely. And I think I'm the right person to do it. You know, somebody who talks about the forgotten men and women of the country, but views my part of the country mostly as a place that he can look down on out of his window in between going to golf courses with his name on it, ought to have to stand next to somebody who's not a millionaire, actually lives in a middle-class neighborhood in an industrial Midwestern city that is the exact kind of community that he has claimed to speak for but sold out when it comes to his actual policy. Somebody who likes to cloak himself in religion. This president, ought to have to debate someone who is not afraid to remind fellow believers that God does not belong to a political party. And yes, somebody who avoided serving when it was his turn ought to be called to account on a debate stage by somebody who can talk about the meaning of service and illustrate why somebody who punishes war heroes and pardons war criminals is no patriot. I will do that. But having said all of that, I will do that quickly and return to what matters most, which is how our individual lives go differently depending on who's the next president. Remember, we're the ones trying to get you a raise. We're the ones prepared to deliver health care to everybody. We're the ones ready to do something about climate change and gun violence. We are ready to make this happen. And the discipline that's going to be required on that debate stage will be to deny this president his famous power to change the subject. Because the less we're talking about him, the more we're talking about you. And the more we're talking about you, the more we're going to win. That's how we're going to defeat Donald Trump. One more thank you to Matt for guiding our discussion. Thank you.
Mayor Pete.
Thank you so much.
Being such a champion for us.
Thank you. Thanks for the kind word. I appreciate it. Thank you. That's right. Well, I don't know how to top that other than to ask you to bottle that energy up, bottle that joy up, bottle up whatever hope propelled you into this room, because I believe strongly that running for office or being involved in a campaign is an act of hope. That's why they call us hope. You notice this? I'm a hopeful. That's what they call us in the news. We're hopeful. And we're hopeful because we believe it actually matters who gets their hands on the pulleys and levers of American government and what values are guiding those hands. And if we get it right, we will not only bring an end to a period in our political history that is so dark, but that sun will come up and we will be working together in a way that makes us proud. I don't believe that because I am young. I don't believe that as a matter of naivete. I believe that as a matter of experience. Having seen in a war zone what Americans can do to work together, having seen in my own city how a place left for dead can pick itself back up, having seen in my own life how even our complicated and troubled political system can deliver better rights over time, like the simple fact that I'm standing in front of you wearing this wedding ring. We can bring about a better day with your help, and I'm asking for your vote to make it happen. So thank you for being here. Thank you for coming. Thank you for caring, and I will see you on the trail.